So have you had your 6 a.m. workout today?
Oh yeah, it's 12:30 our time here. So yeah, no, we trained 7 a.m. So we
Wow.
actually moved it back a little bit.
Wow. I'm an artist, so I can work out like 7 p.m. and wake up maybe at 10. Am I allowed to?
Do you have kids?
No, no, not yet.
Yeah, see, that's the big difference. You got to have kids. That's always the harder one. So my family, we were planning. This is pre-COVID, of course. We were planning to go to Rome this year, as like take the whole family. And I took a bunch of classes in college on like Rome and like the Forum and like the that whole deal. So I had been talking about this for years, and we planned this big trip to like for like 3 weeks. We were going to go to Italy. We were going to go to Rome. We were going to go to Venice. And all of a sudden, COVID hit, and we were like, "Oh!" So yeah, it was yeah, sucks.
I don't know if you've ever been to Rome, but it's beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. So, it was a loss indeed. And on my behalf, I was going to California. I was going to actually get to know the United States for the first time. So now I guess it's a little bit off for this year at least. What do you think of all this? I know I saw you in an interview saying something like, "I'm glad you did not talk about the COVID." I don't mean the COVID. I mean the polarization of every ideals, every the burning down or the taking down of statues and all this racial inequality stuff, and the police versus Black Lives Matter. What do you think of it all?
Oh man, there's a lot to unpack. Man, okay, where do I start? Uh, like, I really don't believe in coincidence. I've always kind of felt that things happen for a reason, and I'm not a big fan of coincidence. It just seems really interesting that all of a sudden this kind of Black Lives Matter and this whole movement really started in the wake of the COVID deal. It just feels like very, very just interesting timing. Not to say that those, George Floyd and that whole deal was orchestrated, but it was definitely a lot of people were at home. People were bummed, and all the other political issues that you're seeing just created a really interesting environment here in the United States. People are pissed, man. People are angry, but I'm kind of with you. I've never been a big fan of ripping down monuments. So I've always believed that, our history is our history, whether it's good, and everybody's history is really bad. I mean, if you look at like look at Spain, look at Portugal, look at how, the Spanish conquest of like of Mexico and Latin America is pretty ugly stuff. I mean, people have done a lot of bad things to each other over the years, and the only way that we hope to avoid them is by remembering these things and not whitewashing them. And I feel so much like, I don't know if any of your listeners have ever read the book Animal Farm, but Brave New World or George Orwell. What things people tend to do is they tend to rip down monuments and rewrite history. And I think when we get to the point where we forget our history, we're doomed to repeat it. Okay, so when I went to college, my dad was an attorney. My brother's an attorney, lawyer. So law has kind of been our family business for
Hmm.
as long as I can remember. So when I went to college, I had visions of being an attorney, and I was going to go to law school. So the first day I showed up, I went to go play football, obviously at UC Berkeley, and the guy that they hooked me up with, who was my like I don't know, academic advisor on my recruiting trip, was this old guy, a guy named Adrian Cragen. And he had been a former dean of the law school, Bolt Hall, which was at Berkeley, which is one of the most prestigious in all the United States. As I sat down with him, it turned out that the old lawyer who apprenticed my father and him were friends. And so we sat there, and, I got to talk to this really amazing dude who was, had been an attorney from like since the 50s. And when I asked him, how should I approach my academic career here at Berkeley? And he said, you need to learn to read and write to the best of your ability. So there's a major here called rhetoric. I want you to check it out. So when I went in for I ended up attending Berkeley my very first semester. We had to take some English classes, and it had like English 1, English 2. And then there was these other classes, which was rhetoric 1A and rhetoric 1B, I want to say. So I signed up for the rhetoric classes on his recommendation. And it was one of the best classes I've ever taken. I mean, it was like, hey, the professor showed up and said, hey, here are these, 10 books I want you to read. This is the first one we're going to read. I want you to be able to be prepared to discuss it. And we're going to pull different arguments out of these books. And I want you to be able to debate them and understand and write papers based upon this stuff. So I went home and just read all the books, read the first book, came in, sat in kind of a Socratic method round table. We discussed all the books, all the arguments, everything that we were trying to pull out of it. And I ended up doing really well. And I realized that this rhetoric thing was for me. I got to read and I got to write and I got to argue and I got to learn the fundamentals of argument, and if you look back at the first rhetorician was Cicero, we were talking about Rome earlier, who was a Roman, ethos, pathos, and logos, and how to formulate arguments and how to break them down and, ability to argue this side, but also to have the empathy to understand where the other person is coming from so that you can argue in defense of whatever you're attacking. So it just provided me a lot of life skills and prepared me to go to law school. So I ended up graduating in 4 years, and then I still had another year of football. So I ended up getting a master's or working on my master's in education. And I was planning to go to law school, and then I got drafted to go play in the NFL. And I figured I'll play in the NFL for a little bit. I don't necessarily know how long I'll play because the average career span's about 3 years. And there, not that many white dudes do it. And I figure I'd play a couple years, make a little bit of money, and then go back to law school. And that turned into 10 years.
10 years.
So then when I retired from the NFL, I was sitting on the couch and I was filling out law school applications. I had to retake my LSAT, which is the entrance exam. And about that time was when, my phone rang, and it was then CEO of CrossFit, Greg Glassman, asking me if I would be interested in creating my own version of CrossFit, based on power, strength, and speed for field sport athletes. And I remember talking to my brother, who's an attorney, and he was like, well, you can go to law school, but, who knows? Maybe this CrossFit thing might be something fun that you do for a year or two and then go to law school. And I was like, okay. So we ended up doing CrossFit football, and now here we are 10 years later after that.
So it comes to show that opportunity does come. You just got to be ready. So I guess going backwards a little bit, I guess communication is one of the most important tools, either for a coach, even a football player, and now as a fitness. Do you already consider yourself a fitness entrepreneur? Do you like the word?
I don't know. I mean, we had to talk about this today. Luke and Tex, who I work with, were joking that they called me an A-list fitness celebrity. And I was like, I don't know how to take that one. So, I wouldn't put myself in I don't know. I mean, I just happened to be a dude that played in the NFL who had a pretty interesting idea. So I think a lot of people that get the chance to go play in the NFL are just so naturally gifted from day one that they don't necessarily understand the path that it took to get them there. They were just better than everybody. They grew bigger and stronger. They didn't get injured, and they just were able to do it. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting, when she asks him, how can you do my calculus homework? And he's like, well, you remember he talked about Mozart and Beethoven sitting down playing the piano? And he's like, I can't play the piano, but I can just play.
But you can do my OCHEM paper in under an hour.
Right. Well, I mean, when it came to stuff like that, I could always just play.
So I think most professional athletes, they can just play. For me, I was always trying to fool somebody into thinking I was better than I was. So I had a very real, I guess you could say, pathway to greatness where that involved training, a lot of effort and persistence and understanding the fine points of this thing. And I took a very analytical approach in determining to not only in the preparation physically, but how I played the game and the way that I, intellectually saw the game and I understood it. So I had a really interesting skill set that I developed coming from a martial arts fighting background, and then being fairly analytical and understanding it. And I was able to build myself into a very accomplished player. And my goal was I always wanted to fool people into thinking that I was better than I really was. And so when I got out of the NFL and they asked me, how did you do these things? I had a pretty interesting blueprint for athleticism and the way that I understood movement and, this and reduction of force and how I move through space and how I do all these things. And as I started talking to people about it, I realized that what I thought was common was pretty uncommon. And I was even more amazed that people that weren't professional athletes wanted to know this stuff. So that was my first thing when CrossFit hit me up about doing the, CrossFit football. I remember thinking, like, do people want to know this stuff? I kind of thought that this was just stuff for professional athletes. And CrossFit was like, no, like normal non-professional athletes want to know these things. So as I got in there and started talking about, quality of movement and, the ability to display your strength dynamically and power and speed and strength and all these other key factors, people just, kind of heads exploded. And all of a sudden we had a big following and people were getting better and stronger. And it allowed me to kind of work out a lot of my stuff. And then what you see today with Power Athlete is really the evolution from like what worked for me and then helping a lot of other people reach those similar goals. So I don't know if I would call myself a fitness entrepreneur, but what we've done really well at Power Athlete is develop a methodology for education and how to teach people how to use this blueprint to understand athleticism and how to foster and develop athleticism.
I think it's a lot similar to stuff that sometimes I feel with this calling me something like an influencer or something. I don't like the word, but eventually, naturally, that's maybe what I become. Like by doing what I like, by doing my by having some passion on what I do, by working step by step, day by day. You with the crew that you've assembled that maybe 10 years ago somebody would ask you, it's going to be like, no, I'm going to have a crew. I'm going to have people working alongside me in terms of, strength and conditioning. Maybe sometimes it's all just so natural. We kind of wake up and it's like, oh, this was assembled somehow, but somebody assembled it. And, what a great workforce it must have been, because right now I have to say, and it's not to toot your own horn, but I must say it's the podcast that I listen to the most. So you guys surpassed Joe Rogan, which is quite a bit for me at least, which is quite a stretch, right? And tell me, how badass was? Yeah, how badass was talking to all these people? I want to get to Matthew Modine. No. Bruno, wait a little bit. So we're going to talk about Matthew Modine later on. So we're not going to get to Matthew Modine just yet. How did you guys come up with the idea of having a podcast about strength and conditioning?
You're listening to another episode of the Premier Podcast in Strength and Conditioning.
So
when was this?
I wasn't involved at all. So Luke and I think Luke got hit up by two guys that followed CrossFit football, a guy named Denny Kay and Professor Booty, which is a guy named Steve Playtech. And they wanted to start a podcast and they hit up Luke. And so Luke, I was busy doing a bunch of stuff. I think we had a seminar to teach. And so Luke was like, yeah. Let's do a podcast. Like we'll do a proof of concept and we'll record an episode and we'll see how it works. And so they record this episode, but nobody told me. So all of a sudden I see like on social media that there's this Power Athlete podcast. And I'm like, who the fuck are these guys? So I end up firing off a cease and desist to them because they were using Power Athlete, which is my trademark. And they're like, freaking out. And then like Luke calls me. He's like, hey, that was us. And I'm like, we're doing a podcast now? And Luke's like, yeah, we're going to do this podcast. And I was like, okay, well, what do you need from me? He's like, well, I just need you to be an occasional guest. Like, you don't have to do it every week. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So they did that first podcast, which I don't think we ever released. And then we've done a couple others. And in the beginning, I was just supposed to be an occasional guest. And then at that point, that's why they always joke with Luke and Tex that like friend of the podcast, special guest joke.
Exactly.
Yeah. So because I was never supposed to be the host, I was just supposed to be an occasional contributor. But then it since has grown into, something a little bit better than that. But yeah, those original ones were like the audio was terrible. We were like, didn't have a studio. We were in our office, trash trucks going by. We had terrible mics. We didn't know how to like record it. And it was just really shitty, but we had some amazing guests. And I look back at like the people that we had in those early days. And I would love to be able to redo those podcasts with them.
And you mentioned Greg Glassman in CrossFit, and the first time I saw you, obviously, like a lot of CrossFitters, because I played around with CrossFit for quite a while. The first time I saw you was in Every Second Counts, the documentary for the 2008 CrossFit Games. Of course, a lot of people asked you about it already. So even before you started CrossFit Football, so before Greg Glassman invited you to create that platform. Somebody invited you to try the CrossFit Games. Was it Greg Glassman himself?
No. So I lived in Newport Beach, and I used to have to drive up to Carson, California, which is about 29 miles, which in LA traffic could be anywhere from 20 minutes to 3 hours. So I would drive up there to train at this place called Athletes Performance. And I eventually got to the point where I just got burned out on driving up. So I was either going to build the gym or I was going to find a little space to lift some weights. And I was doing some Googling, and I ended up finding a CrossFit gym probably like less than a mile from me, which was CrossFit Newport Beach. So I went up there and started training. And I had been introduced to CrossFit by a buddy of mine, so I was familiar with it. And I ended up going to training at this CrossFit Newport Beach, and it was great. It was like a warehouse space. They had, heavy weights. There was, it was just kind of like almost like Fight Club. It was in the back of a building, and it was dark, it was dusty, it was dirty, and it was the type of place that I like to train. And in the middle of that, I guess the owner of the gym, who is kind of a shameless self-promoter, kind of a fucking scumbag, to use some profanity, was reaching out to CrossFit HQ, bragging about, I got this NFL player training with me. About 2 or 3 weeks before the CrossFit Games, they hit him up and said, "Hey, do you think John would compete in the CrossFit Games?" So he asked me, he's like, "Hey, do you want to compete in this CrossFit Games?" I'm like, "What's that?" He's like, "Oh, a bunch of people get together and they compete for like the fittest on the planet at Aerobic." And so I was like, "Yeah, fuck it, let's do it." And so they showed up about a week later, filmed all that stuff, and then we went to Aerobic and we competed. And then I went to training camp for the New England Patriots about a week later.
Oh my goodness! Goodness.
Which I think contributed to the injury that I had in the last preseason game. Just because, because my training was really kicking ass, and then all of a sudden I kind of changed the training for like that 3 or 4 weeks leading up to it. And then when I got to the games, it was like all the workouts, and I think it was just too much. And then I went to training camp and ended up getting hurt in that last preseason game, and that's when I came home and had surgery. And then that was my 10th year, and all of a sudden, I'm rehabbing to come back, and that was when CrossFit hit me up about doing this, and I thought, oh, okay, so I'm going to miss my 10th year. Maybe I'll go back and try out and play an 11th year, or I could do this CrossFit football thing, or go to law school. So I decided to do the CrossFit football and see how it went. And I remember we launched the website, and I got like 17,000 hits the first day. Mm-hmm. And like 30 days later, I was traveling, teaching a seminar, and we booked them, international, and ended up teaching just under 300 seminars over 9 years. I taught about 150, 200 of them, but the guys traveled, as soon as I had kids, I wasn't able to travel as much, but man, we traveled to the ends of the globe, from the Arctic Circle to New Zealand and everywhere in between, teaching that seminar.
So you were one of the people responsible, or maybe the solo responsible person, for actually dividing the aspects in CrossFit. I mean, from starting with the strength/explosive stuff, like either sprint or plyometrics or weightlifting, and then going on to the metabolic conditioning. So that was kind of the heart of CrossFit football. Am I right?
Yeah, well, before CrossFit football, there was just the WOD. And so what I did is, when they asked me how I would improve upon it, I just used standard strength templates that I had used and done over the years that I knew, and just dropped them in with short conditioning workouts. So pre-CrossFit football, there was only one workout I started posting to, a strength workout and a conditioning workout. And at that point, it caught fire and virally infected just about every CrossFit on the planet, where now you can't walk into a CrossFit gym without a strength component and a conditioning component to the training. So much so that Greg Glassman got shit-faced drunk and screamed at me that I virally infected CrossFit by convincing everybody that they needed to be strong. And I was like, thank you. I was like, you know what? Strength is a platform at which everything's built on. Yeah. So the stronger you are, the easier things become. And it doesn't matter whether it's to bear the load or this or this, but it's like, fuck, if you if you're not strong enough to like, thruster 35 pounds, then like, how do you ever get better? So what we did is we taught people that like strength is a platform in which all life is built. Let's make some really strong organisms and all this stuff gets easy. And the people that did CrossFit football were absolutely decimating anybody that did normal CrossFit. And so much so that it completely altered the trajectory of CrossFit. I mean, all of a sudden you're like watching the CrossFit Games and they have sleds and the heavy things and none of that shit existed. I mean, when I went to the games in Aromas, the original deadlift for the deadlift burpee was supposed to be 315. They cut it to 275 because there were people there that couldn't deadlift 315. So, I mean, they were neutering it. And now it's like, shit, they got dudes pulling 500 pounds in workouts. So CrossFit football, whether or not anybody at CrossFit wants to give it the credit, is what really pushed CrossFit into what it is today and probably altered the trajectory. Who knows? It probably would have just been, 20-pound med balls and, 95-pound thrusters if I hadn't come along.
Yeah, and everybody started with the what do you call it? The girls, the
girl workouts.
The girl workouts and what do they call it? The benchmarks, the benchmark workouts like the Frans and the Lindas and whatnot. But then all of a sudden you saw guys like, I remember even Graham Holmberg and Rich Froning, they were starting to do like 3 or 4 workouts a day, which is crazy. But, it's like weightlifting in the morning and then a little bit of, a strength WOD in the evening or something like that. They were starting to, or gymnastics in between, some skill for gymnastics. So everybody was segmenting, which is kind of, do you believe that this segmenting is the way to go in terms of performance? Should you segment everything?
I think the goal, and especially what I really push with a lot of the training, is I want the highest quality movement possible. So like I run into this all the time with our training programs that we put out for the masses here at Power Athlete. People always ask like what should my rest sets be? And my comment is like, I don't know what your rest sets should be. I don't know what your level of conditioning is. My goal is like, hey, if we're going to squat, let's say 5 sets of 5, I need you to rest enough so that the movement is the most high quality movement. If you're slopping it through or that 80-20, I need you to rest longer. I need the single best. Like I'm constantly fighting for this idea of quality. And I think what happened with CrossFit is they got into this more is better kind of volume type of stuff where it's like you can make up for shitty quality by just fucking adding more on top. And the problem all that did is it led to injuries, it led to shitty movement, and all you're doing was replicating awful movement. And that became the default. So I remember when I went to the level 1 and they talked about the 80-20 that, if it looks perfect, you should go faster. And I was like, I raised my hand. I was like, man, as an NFL player, if I only won 80% of my plays, I wouldn't even have fucking been on the field. So how in the world can you allow people to have this 80-20 slop rule? You should be asking for high quality perfected movement at all times. And if you take the time to develop that movement patterns early on and make people really strong, all of a sudden they can add intensity once they understand the movement. The problem is that you guys are progressing people improperly. So I had some really philosophical developments, but the problem was I was arguing with people that weren't athletes, had never trained anybody, and didn't know fuck all about physiology, strength conditioning, or any of the classic principles. They were like Greg Glassman had no formal training. He never competed at a high level, and he never really fucking trained anybody. Dave Castro, even less. Like the people that were at the top of the CrossFit leadership were frauds. And I remember sitting down and being like, so wait a minute, you guys don't even train? You guys can't even do any of this stuff? Like it felt disingenuous to me. So all the workouts we did on CrossFit football, still to this day I've done. We still do all the training. It allows us to fine tune this stuff. And I think it makes for a higher quality, better product. And so there was just it was just very disingenuous.
Something that I've noticed in CrossFit in general, and not all boxes, obviously, some people do a very good job, and they have been, in a way, reassembling and learning from a lot of the experts in every field. But sometimes they say they're eclectic and they only listen to a selected few, but oh well, that's old news. But I saw a lot of people right now during COVID, during the quarantine, they were starting to show and to try to get more followers and likes and whatever for each box in order to make sure they would maintain a certain level of clients whenever this would finish and people would come back to the boxes. And I saw a lot of people throwing WODs out there or throwing their workouts out there or in a more official way or a more public way every day online, like in Instagram and stuff like that. And I was like, You motherfuckers. So this is what you give your athletes. You guys are putting stuff on the board that you guys would not finish yourselves. I mean, one thing that really bothers me is that, program for the what do they say in level 2? Program for the best, scale for the rest. It's like, no, come on. Why? If I'm going to think like that, I'm going to always program for Matt Fraser or Rich Froning, and then I'm always going to scale. What good does that do on the long run? Do you believe that this is a good strategy?
No, I think there's a lot of disingenuous deal in the strength world. I mean, you got guys that are like, hey, you know what? I'm a vegan, but yet they eat steaks, which I don't have a problem with. But just be like, don't claim one thing, or the other one like, hey, I'm all natural. This is this, and then the guy takes a bunch of drugs. So I think like if you want to do it, just own it. The problem that you run into, especially with a lot of this CrossFit programming, is people like so. When I originally taught the CrossFit football seminar, I used to give people like, hey, here's an assignment, take it home. I want you to write a week of programming. And I would like look at this stuff, and then I'd write it up on the board, and I'd be like, have you ever done this workout? How long does this take? Oh, I would never do this shit. And I was like, so you're asking people to do programming that you wouldn't do yourself?
Exactly.
And they were like, no. And I was like, man, here's the secret sauce to CrossFit football. And the reason it's been so successful, and I think the stuff here at Power Athlete's been so successful, is we do all of this shit ahead of time. So we're a cycle ahead. We're constantly testing. We're doing things. And there's things that I've programmed and written out and been like, well, that's an abortion. Like, that's a terrible idea. I should have never have done that. And then you go and you make changes. Or you look and you're like, I know how people are going to compare. Like in this week, we're doing some clusters. So we were like, hey, work up to from 70, 75, and 80%. We're going to do a triple, and then on the back squat, and then you're going to rest 20 seconds and do a triple, and we're going to get a total of 12 reps. So we do that for 3 sets, and it's a really just an easy way for me to get some higher quality volume. Dude, I smashed myself to the point where like even today, like my legs are super sore, and I don't think I wasn't able to hit 80%. I think the highest I got was like 77, 78%. So I kind of shot it, and I even got on there and I was like, hey, I didn't even get 80. And there were a bunch of people on there that were like, hey, I couldn't handle 80% at that. And I'm like, okay, well, at least we know where our starting point is and where we get to progress it too. So I think without doing the training and having a lot of focus on how to make people better and having huge data points and a lot of different athletes doing different training programs and seeing what's working and what's not, I think you just end up living in this echo chamber and just copying what you see other people do.
Because a lot of them base their programming on creativity, right? So it's like, oh, we got to be creative and every day do something a little different than before so that people don't fall into that whole monostructured routine. But truth is, you got to respect the basics. We got to do a lot of the basics. Sometimes it's boring because you're going to do the same thing, but it's all about the intensity. But it bothers me that people base all their programming on the creativity. And sometimes they go like a week or 2 weeks without doing something like, horizontal rowing, for example, horizontal rows. Like they do a lot of pull-ups because they've mastered the pull-ups right now, and they do a lot of kipping pull-ups and whatever. Even if it were strict and not kipping pull-ups, but then it's like, oh yeah, I forgot. Let's do a barbell row, and like 3 weeks from now they're gonna do another couple sets of barbell rows, and they leave a lot of stuff in between.
Well, did you know before CrossFit football there was not a horizontal row programmed in a CrossFit workout?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
So I used to program. So like the way you train, the way you train your back and the way you train your chest is you vertical press, vertical pull, horizontal press, horizontal pull.
Exactly.
So I mean, like there's like those different planes of motion, those 4 different planes of motion. And I remember they asked me, they were like, do you see any holes? I'm like, dude, there's no horizontal pull. And they were like, well, how do you do it? I'm like, dude, we've been doing supine ring rows or supine bar rows. Like there's a million different variations, and that kind of like, bent over row, single one. I mean, dude, when I programmed 1-arm dumbbell rows in CrossFit football, I got hate mail from people. That's not functional.
That's bodybuilding. That's bodybuilding.
Well, but if you look and what's, and we did, I put a ton of bodybuilding in there because we used to lift heavy weights. We did a bunch of Olympic lifting. We did plyometrics and we did bodybuilding because what bodybuilders have figured out is how to create a larger cross-section size of a muscle and make bigger athletes. And if you look at like all the Chinese weightlifters and a lot of these guys, man, they do their Olympic weightlifting and then they do a bunch of bodybuilding accessory work. Like that's how athletes have trained forever. And then all of a sudden CrossFit gets in there and they figure that they're going to change the paradigm because, their fucking drunk leader decided that he didn't like all that stuff. So, it's a bad deal.
Your interview with Fred Hatfield was legendary, and I loved what he said. He said something like, I even put it here in my notes, which was, "You got to sneak up on the weight." I love this sentence. Like, programming for strength is you sneak up on the weight. You kind of sneak up on the weight every time you go for that lift, for the squat, the deadlift, the bench press. You kind of sneak up on the weight until you get to where you want to go. So basically, to top this conversation with in terms of CrossFit, and because I realized that, I mean, even though we're kind of bashing a little bit on CrossFit, we're kind of criticizing because we can, obviously, and we would never disregard that it actually was a useful platform, and it really brought a lot of good stuff to the menu. Just so that the listeners don't think that we're people who don't recognize where we came from, in a way, especially me.
Well, I don't bash CrossFit, or what I really was kind of pissed off with, at least for me personally, was the leadership and the way that they were couching these things. CrossFit has done more to put barbells in people's hands than anything on this planet since like Arthur Murray.
So true.
Or, I mean, dude, like the rise of the micro gym, people having garage gyms from like, equipment from Rogue and Sornex and all the other stuff. I mean, it put barbells in people's hands that would have never found barbells. So for that, I'm forever grateful. What's kind of always a little upsetting is that if the company had been owned and not run by absolute crazy people, that thing would have been a fitness juggernaut that would have altered the trajectory of this world. Mm-hmm. Like it was on fire. Like if they had just had some standard strength conditioning principles kind of weaved in, some best practices with business, and not a C-suite and an ownership that was so morally and ethically and educationally bankrupt, this thing would have fucking gone to the moon. And I think finally now they got Glassman out, and this Eric Rosa guy seems pretty legit, man. And I really appreciate kind of how thoughtful he is, especially in the business systems. But there was a time where if CrossFit had just not had their leadership and their C-suite and actually had people that were business people that understood how to kind of weave this thing, could have fucking taken this thing to, it could have been the Amazon of fitness in terms of like, thousands of affiliates around the globe supporting them instead of like kicking you in the balls at every point. And that is, I think, part of the trepidation or a little bit of friction that you feel is because it was such a missed opportunity by people that just couldn't get out of their own fucking way because of their own just inferiority, lack of fear of success, or whatever you want to call it. So, but in terms of a methodology, if they could have couched a little bit different and been more inclusive, man, they could have owned the space. They could have absolutely owned the space. And I think that's a missed opportunity because their effect on health and wellness could have been generational in terms of how far reaching it was.
That is so true. And coming from the martial arts, which was the martial art that you started practicing? Was it karate?
Shotokan.
Shotokan. Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I, the guy I trained with was old Japanese dude, and like the pictures on the wall and the whole deal. So yeah, we started in Shotokan, and then I got a little bored of the kicking part and wanted to get into more boxing. So there was a kickboxing place that I would go to that just let me box, and then I got into when I got into that, I did that for a while, and then I met this really cool dude, a guy named Nono Labonsier, whose son's actually a UFC fighter. And Nono taught me Hapkido and Jiu-Jitsu, and we did boxing. And that was really, I think, some of the best foundational training I've ever done.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, because coming from martial arts, I believe that it's very much different from you. You would never in the martial arts do like a year or not even a year, like 3 months of classes and believe that you're the shit. And I've seen a lot of CrossFit people get to that point when they haven't even done any type of sport before that, just because they lost a little bit of weight or they got a little bit ripped or they could do, I don't know, a 200-pound snatch. That all of a sudden they're the shit. So would you say that the concept of fitness by Greg Glassman, would you believe that it's not accurate, like the work across broad time and modal domains?
I think there's some real genius in his original thoughts. The problem is how you get there. Like is kind of different. I think the definition of CrossFit is extremely self-serving. The ability to increase work capacity over broad time modal domains, functional movements performed at high intensity. What does intensity mean? The way I understand intensity is percentage of 1RM. So like if you squat 500 pounds, 80% is your intensity for the day. So the way that they look at it is intensity is kind of an emotional response. How hard did you work? Did you go, increase work capacity? Are you going harder each day? And the problem is that there's, there should be some inherent periodization in there where like not every day you fucking burn it down. So in the NFL, there would be, like a Wednesday would be a hard training day, Thursday would be a little easier, Friday would be a little easier, take off Saturday, and then you go max intensity on Sunday. So there had to be a little bit of ebb and flow. The problem is you have people that are just setting themselves on fire each day with the workout, trying to, chase this idea of fitness. And I think the problem is when you get too far over, all of a sudden you become unhealthy and it becomes, some bigger issues. So I think there was some original genius in it, but I think if he had just put the structure in earlier and been like, here's the deal. And actually, the way CrossFit was first explained, and when I read the original information, it actually made sense. Like master movement, right? So learn to lift weights, be proficient in Olympic weightlifting, train the gymnastics movements, do some conditioning. And there was this whole thing on skill development. Like if you took it like a little bit more like gymnastics is a great example, right? You have to be able to complete certain movements to be able to progress. Like, hey, and I watch my daughters at gymnastics. If they master one move, then they get to the next move and it kind of unlocks as they go. And I think what happens with CrossFit, it's like going into, gymnastics today and the person day one's like, what are we doing? Oh, we're working on the high bar. Really? Okay. Or, hey, we're on the tumbling track and we got to do, 3 consecutive backflips. So I think what happens is they just throw people in, and a lot of times they're not building the foundation that they needed earlier on. And the smart gyms have. They've taught people like, hey, we're taking a kind of a CrossFit football approach. We're going to do some kind of short kind of mixed modal conditioning, but we're going to stack it with a lot of solid strength work, and we're going to make sure that our people are strong and stable, can do strict pull-ups. Like For example, I got a video the other day from a lady who hit me on Instagram. It's like, hey, I'm having this terrible breaking in my upper back when I'm coming out of the hole in the squat. And she sent me the video. Sure enough, as she came up, you can see her back start to break. She's like, how do I fix this? My first question is, how many pull-ups do you have? 0 pull-ups. Okay. Your back will break until you get strict pull-ups. Everybody that I've seen this upper back breaks, we end up doing a bunch of H pulls or vertical pulls, sorry. And as they get vertical pulls, all of a sudden now their upper back doesn't break. So the reason we use the pull-up is to create a nice, strong, stable foundation for you to place a bar. So she's like, what should I do? And I'm like, you can continue to squat and run into this, or you can put time into the accessory work to make sure that your upper back is strong. So I think teaching people at the level one, if this, then that, like, here are the faults. This is what you're going to encounter. This is the best practices. This is how you should lay out. Like when the people come train with you, these are the benchmarks that they need to hit before they can progress. Like I need 10 strict pull-ups before you learn to kip. I need you to be able to, deadlift and do all these other movements before I progress you into something else. And I think if they had put those different steps and locks in, kind of similar in gymnastics, very similar in martial arts, I think they would have done a lot better. Mm-hmm. The one thing which kind of blows me away is when I started in martial arts, this was probably like 1982. I think we had like 4 belts. So there was a white belt. I want to say there was like an orange belt, a green belt, a brown belt, and then it was black. So and I remember I was like a white belt for like almost 2 years. And then I finally got my first belt. And I remember like the process for belts were like, now I like when I, click on Instagram and I see people doing jujitsu or martial arts, there's like 15 different colors of belts. There's stripes on the belts. They got tape on the belts. I mean,
Yeah.
so they've really put all these like kind of like this is how far you are, a lot more incremental. I mean, I remember literally I had a white belt for like 2 years, and then finally they were like, hey, you're going to test on this Saturday for another belt. And I was like, okay. And we showed up and we had to do like, I think we had like 3 katas we had to do. And then we had to do some basic like kind of sparring type stuff. And then I got my next belt. And then it was like, oh, cool. When do I get another belt? And they're like, when you're ready. And then I think I trained there for like another year. And then they were like, hey, you're ready for a next belt. So like
Simpler times.
Like this whole, well, so
good
I
times.
went, yeah, it was awesome. Like I took my kids, like I was looking for some Hapkido around here, and there was a couple Korean martial arts. And so I went in and just said, hey, can I come in and watch? I got some kids that I want to get into martial arts. I took martial arts. I just want to come watch how you run this stuff. And we went into this one place, and like for their kids classes, like all their black belts were like 8, 9, and 10 years old.
Wow.
And so I asked the lady, I'm like,
that speaks volumes.
Well, like I was like, how are these 8-year-olds? Well, they've been here they've been training 4 years. They earned their black belts. And I was like, dude, there's no way the compulsory and the things that we were required to do in terms of like, so the old school, like our floor when I did Shotokan, it was hardwood. And you had to kneel on the hardwood to the point where like, the shin hop that we teach in, that we use in one of our plyometric movements was how you had to get up off the ground was basically do a shin hop. And like, you go in, everything's padded. And I'm like watching the kids, and they were like, hey, like what time's the kids class? And so a couple kids kind of trickle in, a few come in late. All of a sudden there's like 4 black belts. There's like an 8, a 10, and 11-year-old black belts. And I'm like, I asked the lady, I'm like, what's the rate? Well, they started training at 4 and they were black belt by 8. And I was like, we're fucking out of here. So we left. The lady called me and she was like, well, what'd you think? I'm like, one, you had 4 kids, not to say that a kid can't be a black belt, but I'm like, that's not what I'm looking for. I mean, I'm not looking for people that just pay the money and get their belts. And then the other problem too was that the adult black belts were severely out of shape. Like they were all really heavy and out of shape. And I was like, dude, the old man that trained that I learned from, that dude was like beef jerky. That dude was like in phenomenal shape in his 60s and 70s. I mean, the dude was a badass. He used to like take his gi off, and the dude was like, in great shape. Like he was strong as shit. His hands were like iron. I remember him like, walking around in, the bamboo bokken that has all the strings. He would walk around, and like when you were in your different like punches, he would like, watcha, like hit you with this thing.
Nice.
And I remember I went home and I told my mom, I'm like, he hits us with sticks. And my mom's like, well, yeah, you've seen martial arts. That's how it works. They're supposed to hit you with sticks. And I was like, I can't imagine now if you did that, how different it would be.
Oh, woof. Oh, they would take them out of school. I mean, the parents would be crazy. I've been having the honor of interviewing some of the guys that we grew up watching the movies. I remember you talking about a lot of the movies that I watched, like Jim Cotta and Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon, and guys
like the fact that in the back, like right behind you, you have Enter the Dragon.
Exactly.
Which is one of my favorite movies. I mean, Enter the Dragon, Return of the Dragon. Dude, Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon is still to this day one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, I love that. I got to interview Taimak, which is the main actor, so it was really great. And these guys, they're in their 60s, and they are so freaking ripped. They look better than me, and they've been doing it their whole lives. He was talking about how he's now going into jiu-jitsu for not now, but maybe the last 10 years he devoted himself more to jiu-jitsu. I interviewed Richard Norton, who is in his 70s and looks fantastic and is still growing and learning a lot from these disciplines. And it's like, wow, it's such a huge difference in terms of the mindset, and these guys live it. They are the real deal. It's really good to connect with people like that, because the role models are starting to get really, really skewed. And a lot of these people, even guys like, I'm not going to mention names, but guys like great guys from powerlifting who have great genetics and stuff, and who are having a huge following on Instagram, that right now are only showing showing stupid stuff, like it's like their girlfriends showing their butts and stuff like that. And I'm watching that and I'm like, oh no, don't succumb to this bullshit. Otherwise, young people are always going to have these skewed idols, stuff like they're not going to be they're not going to know the difference between discipline, ethics, and people who actually do their stuff, years on end, other than people who just, are roided up their asses and just lift huge amounts of weight, but they all, it's like they succumbed to the market of only wanting the challenges, the 30-day challenge, the 60-day challenge, and stuff like that. I think it's such...
There's no athleticism in lifting weights. I mean, I lift weights every day. We run, we train, we do a whole bunch of stuff. But at the end of the day, like moving a weight from point A to point B, like doesn't take athleticism. Some really unathletic people do that. Mm-hmm. And, you can be in phenomenal shape and look the part, but like the ability to be able to move through space and to have people look and be like, holy shit. Like I was watching some of your videos. I mean, dude, just some of the aerials you were doing were incredible.
Oh,
like,
thanks.
Dude, this guy's athletic. He can move through space. He, strong, like, watching you actually explode and get, some vertical displacement. Like that stuff to me is impressive. Watching people lift, like just watching some guy squat big weight, like I'm like, to me, like it's a great display of strength. But like what I want to see is I want to be impressed by people's athleticism. I want to see people move really well. I just am obsessed with the idea of like, so years ago, somebody asked me, like we were at a seminar and people were like, well, how do you know what good movement is? And I was like, how do you not know what good movement is? Everybody can see it. You have this inherent coach's eye, like just for like the same deal. Like if we were sitting at a restaurant, we're sitting at a cafe and, in Portugal, and all of a sudden, from a distance, I can hear a front engine V12 Ferrari come up. Right. And all of a sudden that Ferrari pulls up, and I'm not a Ferrari fan. I'm more of a Porsche fan, but I appreciate not only the sound that Ferrari takes the time to tune their engines, but like the lines and the color and the attention to detail. There isn't a single person, not even if they're a car person, that sees that Ferrari pull up and hears it and sees it, that doesn't think, oh shit, that's a beautiful car. Just like if all of a sudden a beautiful girl walks down the street, every person, whether or not they, catcall, whistle, or just kind of go on their way, thinks like, wow, that's a really pretty girl. I was, like smoke show. So like, that's the same thing with movement. We have this inherent coach's eye where we know symmetry and beauty and what looks good. And all of a sudden, like, you see people lift weights and you see people do things, and like instantly you get this kind of coach's eye where you're like, man, that's aesthetically pleasing. I like how they did that. That looks good. And that was a pretty interesting point within our seminar, being like, when you compete, watch people lift weights, whether or not it's good or bad, right? Based off of like, if you want to throw up in your mouth because it looks like they broke their spine on something, that's a problem. You have to stop them. And then your goal as a coach is to get them and use, cues, accessory work, whatever it looks like, or, time, whatever, whatever levers I have to pull to make their movement from point A to point B the best looking and aesthetically pleasing. Like that should be the goal of every coach. And when I played football, the goal was to be able to move through space and make it look seamless and effortless. Like I can, the ball is snapped, I move through space, I punch, everything looks perfectly timed, and nothing looks awkward. Everything looks very deliberate and perfect. And like that is what everybody should be striving for. The problem is that if you're just moving a barbell from point A to point B, what does that really teach me about athleticism? It doesn't. It's just a foundational movement to make me strong that allows me to go do other things. The problem is a lot of these guys, they don't fucking do anything else.
Yeah. And your position in the NFL, you're offensive lineman, right?
Yes, correct.
It's very specialty based. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's like having 70 heavyweight fistfights that last 5 to 7 seconds, right? Goodness. Like, so imagine strapping on armor, 8-pound helmet, you're lining up a dude who's about 18 inches to 24 inches away from you. The ball is snapped and you basically are in the most violent fight of your life for about 5 to 7 seconds. The whistle blows, you walk back, you rest about 45 to 50 seconds, and you do that probably 70 times every Sunday. And so I am not a huge football fan. Like I'll watch it and people ask me all the time. What I really enjoyed was the violent nature of the game. I liked the training aspect. I liked the training and the run. Like what I wanted to do is I wanted to sharpen my blade. We'll use a little bit of sword, little martial arts deal. I wanted to sharpen my blade through the training, through the running, through, the crucible, whatever it looked like, temper the blade, whatever it is. I wanted to sharpen that blade so that when I was ready to use it, I was the most lethal, sharpest blade I could be. And I love the violence. Wow. So I years ago, I saw a sign that a guy held up that's like, I'm just here for the violence. That was 100% my job. I was just there every Sunday because I enjoyed the violence. I enjoyed the nature. And years ago, I was on a podcast and some guy asked me, he's like, oh, do you consider yourself a football player? And I was like, I played football, but I would consider myself a master of violence more than I would consider myself a football player. I like the stress and the just like the stress and like the compounding nature of this like stressful moment like gave me extreme clarity. Like it was like my heart rate fell, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, and like it was the most peaceful of moments. And it was like the ball would snap, and it was just the most violent fist fight, and like I loved every minute of it.
You had an evaluation once in which they said something about you had a special, I'm not going to call it skill, but maybe a special trait in you that you could see stuff in slow motion.
Yeah.
You said that on barbell shrug, and I was like, wow, this is really something. I mean, did it happen to you, something that happens maybe with auto racers that
same deal.
Yeah, it's like they start watching stuff in slow motion, or they start figuring out stuff that most people would not catch.
Yeah. So what happened is as the stress goes up, for some reason, I have the ability to slow, like the way your brain works is it kind of goes up in these little waves. And what happens is that your mind takes pictures at the top of each one. And then what it does is it fills in with distortion. That's why like when people take illicit drugs, they kind of see trails.
Yeah.
Is because it's kind of messing it up.
Yeah,
so
that
our
I know.
brain isn't continuous. So yeah, like what it's just like an old time movie on a reel. It's a series of frames, and then we run it fast enough, and we see it in continuous motion. So what they and I went and checked out this doctor. I was in a study about it. What they found was that certain part of the percentage of the population, a very small, can actually through like stress and kind of like they call it like the mechanism. I think can voluntarily slow time by extending those out. And so for me, when I would, get ready and go play and kind of like work yourself into this kind of like really like kind of altered state to be able to go do this job, everything got really quiet and everything happened in slow motion. So as I would get in my stance, all of a sudden things would get like eerily quiet, and all of a sudden everybody started moving in slow motion. The ball would snap, and then I would move, and I could see people's hands. I could see everything in slow motion. And that was just something, whether or not it's inherent, like it's a gift, or is it something that's developed? It was something that I had. I mean, to the point where I tested it in other ways. I rode a motorcycle. My buddy had a twin turbo Hayabusa that I rode, and without a helmet, I rode 200 miles an hour on that bike. Oh. So I laid down on the tank underneath the windscreen and literally started hitting it, and hit 200. And the faster I was going, the slower things were happening. Same with driving a car fast. All of a sudden time slows and I see everything. So it's almost like the more stress goes up, like the more stressful the situation, the slower things happen and the greater the focus.
Because it's all very explosive. I mean, it's a play is like 3 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds. What's the average of a play in American football?
5 to 7 seconds.
Oh, Jesus, yeah. I played a little bit here in Portugal, but I don't know much. I played as a linebacker. So you look at me, it's like, you a linebacker? You were playing at 300 pounds?
Yeah. I think I was somewhere between 303, 306, 308. So I was always between 300 and 310.
Yeah, you got nothing on my 198. So,
well, dude, you're fast and agile, man. That
running away.
Dude.
Yeah,
I played with some guys who were probably that size and were so fast and so quick that like they just were extremely lethal in how they did their job. But I think from like coming back and having a fighting background and just the things that I did growing up, like offensive line play is very similar to boxing. Like how you cut a guy off in the ring and kind of like move within space and, never square him up, always kind of play 2/3 inside out. First meaningful touch, how to, kind of like throw a shoulder and give like all the stuff that I learned boxing and how to cutting a guy off in the ring and all this stuff that we worked on the focus mitts, like all of that translated so well to playing offensive line in the NFL, to the point where I told guys, they were like, what should I do for my training? I'm like, you need to go to a boxing gym. And I don't mean some like crunch bullshit boxing gym. I mean like an old place with like an old black trainer that you can't understand, and you leather jump ropes and bags that, they've had to replace the stuffing every year for the last 30 years and are so worked in. Like that type of stuff when you walk in, and that's
Rocky III,
that sharp, like that sharp smell of sweat and like fear and desperation that when you walk in, you're like, oh shit, people get their asses beat here. Like go find a place like that. And find like an old trainer that, talks to you nothing about the history of this and that. And I'm like, find that dude. There'll be a whole bunch of like black and white picture framed all over the wall. Find that place.
Yeah,
and that's where you want to train.
Yeah, with gloves that smell like feet. You want gloves that smell like feet, or vinegar, and vinegar mixed with feet. Otherwise, it's not going to be good. So, how did you manage to, during all those years when you played in the NFL and doing something so specific? How did you manage, or what type of workouts did you do in the gym to make sure that you had a more broad component to your athletic build?
So the guy that I trained with in the off season was a guy named Rafael Ruiz, who to this day is probably the world's best strength coach that nobody's heard of. Raf is a very kind of boutique, very kind of just not an overly chest beater, but like when people meet him, they kind of are like, holy shit, this guy's the real deal. Our training was pretty interesting. There was a ton of movement in our training. So he had a gymnastics mat. We used to do a bunch of tumbling. We do, moving through space, like the kind of the sagittal kind of everything in a hallway that you see in CrossFit. Like you can do almost the entire CrossFit workout standing in a door frame. So, but sport isn't played in a sagittal plane. It's played in all multiple planes. So we just did a ton of change of direction. And then we played a lot of sport, man. We, in the off season, we played a ton of soccer. We played, every sport we could think of to try to increase, like what you were doing. So just hand-eye coordination, did a bunch of fight stuff, and just for the most part, man, like a lot of dynamic med ball, and we banged heavy weights. We did a lot of pull-ups, and we sprinted and ran. And then I would go do my technique work and, go do my boxing training. And that was pretty good in terms of what I needed to do.
When you say ran, what type of running do you mean? Is it good to get a 300-pound lineman and say, go for a jog in terms of the impact?
No, we sprinted. For me,
like uphill?
We ran uphill, but for the most part, we just ran fast. In hindsight, knowing what I know now about building an aerobic base, I would have probably done a lot of more kind of low volume, lower heart rate conditioning. At the time, I was kind of like in the camp of like, hey, I'm going to lift heavy weights. I'm going to sprint as fast as I can. That's the only conditioning I need. And now that I kind of understand a lot more about kind of building an aerobic base, I think I could have had a more efficient aerobic system. But like that level of like that piece didn't come to me until later because, the way what I was doing within my training was reaping big dividends. But I think I could have done a lot more on that aerobic side and making sure that I had a big aerobic base to build upon. We've since found that, strength and all these other things really, really kind of build upon, like I said, strength is a big platform on which all is built. I think that aerobic base is a big component too. And that wasn't something that I really cared much about or really even gave a second thought to. I thought anything that looked like low heart rate was kind of bullshit. So that was a mistake that I since have made. That I've since rectified.
That is very interesting because a lot of people don't know that. Some of the people believe that only the circuit training will be enough for your aerobic base. Do you believe that's not true?
No, I think you have to train within different heart rates. And if you're always revving the car as high as you can, you're not building that kind of low endurance, kind of low level kind of aerobic, which is really good for health. I mean, it increases mitochondrial density and just helps a lot of things with body composition and how you metabolize fat. I think people that don't work on just doing some, 20, 30 minutes at 70% heart rate, or at least 2 to 3 days a week are leaving a lot on the table. And I think, with the CrossFit stuff of going in there and just trying to fucking fire everybody up at 180 beats a minute every single day is leaving a lot on the table. There needs to be some more kind of low-level aerobic type work to try to build upon. So just like the strength work. So, especially for a lot of our programs and the way I do my own training is I, usually bang weights 4 days a week. I try to get at least 4 or 5 aerobic days and then probably hit 3 conditioning and at least a sprint day. So I think if I can hit that, I'm usually pretty good.
That's incredible advice. That's great advice. I think most people should really do that aerobic base. So would you say like at least 3 times a week, 2 to 3 times a week, do some sort of moderate cardio, whether it be I don't know, elliptical, running, a little bit of walking or power walking. What do they call it? I really like walking with a heavy weighted vest for 30 minutes. Oh, okay.
I love the assault bikes. So we use those. But for the most part, anything that looks like, hard work at a kind of a low level heart rate for about 30, 40 minutes is more than anybody needs. And it's not something people have to do 6-7 days a week, unless you're trying to get in contests for a bodybuilding show. But I think, if you can supplement your training with 3 or 4 days of that, I think you're really going to be farther ahead. Helps with sleep, helps metabolizing fat. It helps with strength. It helps with all the other stuff. Kind of how I stumbled upon that is years ago, we did a program, which was actually the test program for a program that we have called Jack Street. And it was like a 22-week program that I had written out that I had, talked to John Meadows and a couple people about. And I had this idea I wanted to do some bodybuilding stuff for Power Athlete. So we did this program. And, the deal was Luke and Tex were supposed to gain 10% of their body weight. And then Callie and I were supposed to lose 10% of our body weight. And then we were going to do a bod pod and kind of see who lost muscle, who did this. And as I got into it, everything started going really well. The problem was I've never been a huge fan of pulling out and like cutting calories. So I kind of I would much rather do more work and throw in some aerobic work to try to burn some calories than eat less. So all of a sudden I kind of hit a point where like my weight kind of stalled out and I had about another, I think like 10, 12, 14 pounds to lose. So I started basically every day hitting like 30, 40 minutes of aerobic work, just trying to burn those extra calories because I didn't want to eat less. And all of a sudden, as I started doing all this aerobic work, I was started PRing all these lifts in the gym. So I did we did like a max set of deadlift at I think it was 505, and I pulled for 18 reps or something. And all of a sudden, my squats, everything got better to the point where I was kind of scratching my head a little bit. And I'm like, man, I'm PRing all these lifts. And I'm doing all this aerobic work. And then I went back and started reading all this stuff about aerobic base and, mitochondrial density and, fat oxidation and really just, some really interesting stuff. And I realized I was like, fuck, I missed this whole chapter when I was playing the NFL. I could have added a lot more aerobic work, which probably would have helped with recovery and a lot of other factors. So that was kind of a mistake I made, and I kind of regret. I wish I could go back in time and change that. But so now, some, at least 3 to 4 days a week, or anywhere from 25 to 40 minutes. Try to hit some low level 70-75% heart rate endurance work. Just a little bit of low level aerobic work.
Oh man, thank you so much for the tip. And speaking of running, and now in the intensity side, on the high intensity side. So rarely do I see sprints being programmed, for example, in CrossFit and stuff like that. But if I want to do a generalist type of work where I want to have the best performances possible, and I want to be strong, I want to be agile, flexible, and whatnot, if I want to cover all segments, where do I, or how can I include the sprints in this in my programming, for example?
There was a pretty interesting piece of research that came out a couple years ago that compared lean body mass with sprinters, and they found that the leanest, the individual that carried the lowest body fat, so carried the greatest amount of lean muscle mass to body fat ratio, tended to win the gold medal for sprinting in the 100 and the 200. So if you looked at lean body mass and body fat, you could pretty much pick the winner. And all the research on the deal was the people that sprint are more muscular than people that don't sprint. So the act of sprinting, moving yourself through gravity, the eccentric load of landing, turning all that over, requires a ton of lean body mass. And so the people that sprint more regularly carry more lean body mass and are leaner than people that don't sprint. because you need all these things to be an efficient sprinter. So when people ask me about sprinting, and I'm like, have you guys ever seen anybody that sprints that's not jacked? Because I run into people like, oh man, those NFL dudes, these guys. No, dude, the people that run fast, whether it be Olympic sprinters, NFL players, whatever it is, the people that run fast and sprint often are usually dramatically leaner. Now, obviously, offensive linemen that you see in the NFL have to be 300 plus pounds, 350, 360 pounds. So it's tough to be that big and not carry body fat. But when you look at the smaller guys, the guys that sprint a lot and run every single play as fast as they can, they're pretty lean, and they're always lean, and they carry a lot of muscle because you need a lot of muscle. So what I would say is I would probably pick distances. I'd say, you know what, I'm going to set up my distance at like my short distance at 60 meters. I'm going to go 60, 80, 100, 120, and maybe 150. And I'm going to look at it and say, all right, you know what, on my max effort day, I'm going to run, let's say 660s. Then the next time I come back, I might want to do some kind of tempo sprints, which is like a 75%, effort kind of a deal. And then I would kind of just pick differing rates, and I kind of push it out and do 60s, 80s, 100s, 120s, 150s. And I would kind of cycle back through those and just kind of rotate through those distances. And, hitting somewhere between, anywhere from 4 to 6, 7, 8 reps of max effort sprint. I think people don't understand what that means is so when I was in Tampa, we used to train with a bunch of Olympic sprinters. And what blew my mind is those guys would run as fast as they could. And then it would probably take them anywhere from 10 to 12 minutes to recover enough to be able to go run another sprint at max intensity, which was anything over 92% of their fastest time. So if they didn't run within that 92%, they rested longer. And if they still couldn't run that fast, they were done for the day. Because the only way you get faster is by running fast. So when people in CrossFit, like, hey, 50 wall balls, 400 meter run, they do the wall balls and they jog the 400 meters. That's not doing anything for speed development. Yeah. The only way you get faster, it's kind of like the only way you get faster is by running fast. The only way you get stronger is by lifting heavy weights. Like if running slow and lifting light weights made us faster and stronger, we would probably do those because it's easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's always got to be like 90% up or even close to 100% on the intensity or on the full speed. And for example, for a guy like me, I'm a martial artist, I'm a stuntman, and how do I know in terms of the strength, how do I know when my maximum strength work will be enough? And by enough, it's not that I would not keep working on strength, obviously, but when do I know that I would get, for example, diminishing returns on how strong I am?
Yeah. Dude, that's a very common thing. I mean, it happened to me my rookie year in the NFL. I had this idea that I wanted to be the strongest I could. And the only problem, though, is to get up to be the strongest, I think I ended up putting on like 20 pounds. So I weighed like 326 pounds. And I benched 535 for reps, and I was super strong. And then I went out on the field, and I was like moving in slow motion, and I felt like a planet with like little moons orbiting me when these guys were running around. I was like,
you felt like a planet.
I did. I literally felt like a big planet with these dudes orbiting me. And I realized, I was like, well, shit, like you spent all this time. So the amount of time and effort that it took me to get as strong as I could forced me to put on body weight and size that I didn't need and took away from my speed. So I went home, I ate like, for the next 6 weeks, I literally ate like one meal a day, ate like a chicken salad at night, went and lifted weights and sprinted and ran, and then ate my like one big ass chicken salad. Came back at the end of that 6 weeks, had lost 20 pounds and was 306 and, was sub 10% body fat and basically killed it. I mean, that extra 20 pounds was slowing me down. And so I think what happens is if chasing the strength numbers negatively affects your ability to execute the movements that you know that you need to do, then that's where that diminishing returns. Like, hey, like if you were to set it up and say, all right, I knew. So for me personally, it was 10 pull-ups, 10 strict pull-ups with 90 pounds between my waist was like a benchmark. 5 sets. So I ended up having to do 5x5, 405 bench, 500 pound squat in sub 10 minutes. If I could do those, there was no need for me to progress any farther because I had hit the numbers that I needed to be able to to get back to what I knew to play. So I kind of set benchmarks. So for you, if all of a sudden you put 100 pounds in your squat and you put 100 pounds in all these lifts and you can't go and do the movements that you've always done, like whether it was tumbling or aerials or this or jumping here, that becomes a problem. Now, if you add those extra strength and all of a sudden you're better at these movements, then I think you've hit kind of that secret sauce and you're probably heading in the right direction.
So you're one of those people that always carry the notepad around while you're working out to figure out the stuff, or not so much? Are you very mathematical with your approach?
I used to be. I kind of train on a little more, like I always have a program, but I kind of like what I call gambler sets, where like some days I go in the weight room and I feel real good, I'll kind of push it. If some days are not so good, I just kind of survive it a little bit. Whereas before I was a lot more fine-tuned with it, where I was like, hey, you know what? Like, this is what I want to do today. These are the numbers I need to hit, and hell or high water, I'm going to hit them. And I think like as I've gotten a little bit older, I've become a little more intuitive. But I also never want to get to the point where I feel kind of like a prisoner of my own body. Like that's kind of an interesting thing. Like I see a lot of guys too, especially on Instagram, or some like super jack dudes or guys that are bodybuilders. They almost look like prisoners in their own body. Like they can't move. You see them and they're like super stiff. Like I want to still be able to be agile. I want to be able to move through space. I want to be able to do, anything. Like I was joking, yesterday I was cooking steaks and it's been raining a lot out here in Texas. And I have a piece of plywood down over our tree wells. And as I was walking, I hit it and I slipped. And as I like went down, I like totally busted my ass, hit my elbow, tweaked my knee, but I didn't drop the steaks. So I was like still holding the plate and I was like, oh shit, I set him down. I got back up and I was like, ooh, I'm a little sore. And my wife was like, oh, are you okay? And I'm like, well, I didn't drop the meat. So at least then I like know my athleticism's still there where if I can fall and bust my ass, but I won't dump the plate of meat, I'll be okay.
What do you think of those modalities nowadays, like movement culture and stuff like that, and animal flows, and how do you view those? Because it's strange, right? Sometimes I think they get too many components at once, but I believe there's a structure.
I think people moving is the key. Like I believe in movement, and I want people to move better. I don't know if I need to like watch think about it. Like you're probably a fan of all like the 70s and 80s martial arts kung fu movies.
Oh yeah,
where these guys would master praying mantis, like this, and they would master this and the beetle, and they would do the crane, and they had all these movements where they were mimicking.
Watch out, that guy's really crazy.
Like at the end of the day, all that different type of kung fu, those dudes usually got their ass beat by the one dude who was just pretty good at all the basics. So I think that MoveNet stuff, I think it's all pretty interesting. The idea of like, moving through nature and doing that like makes a lot of sense. But I think at the end of the day, man, I think I really think that the basis of movement, like you should lift some weights, you should sprint, you should do some aerobic work. And I think you need something to do athletically, whether it's, I joke with all my friends that do jujitsu because I did jujitsu back in the day. They always like, hey, do you want to go? And I'm like, it's kind of old man. Like it's very passive. Like there's a lot of laying back and there's a lot of movement and give and take. And I think it's good. I just kind of joke. I'm like, man, am I old enough to do jujitsu now? And but I think like martial arts, I think anything that allows you, whether it's going out and playing tennis or hoops or basketball or this or anything that allows you to have fun and continue to use your body in an athletic way is what's important. But I think the idea of just like going to the gym and lifting weights, and eating 1,000 calories so that I can look good on Instagram, I think that's fucking broken.
No, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned jiu-jitsu because I'm always a little bit scared that I'm 36, so I probably have a few good years with type A fibers, but I'm always kind of scared. I'm always kind of worried that if I step into those types of modalities in which you have to keep the tension for a long time, and if you have to really work those slow twitch fibers, could you work to a point where you're going to lose a little bit of the fast twitch fibers? Does it make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, like the CrossFit was what we really saw where to be able to do that level of high output for that amount of time, you're going to have a conversion of fast twitch to slow twitch fibers. I mean, you have to just be able to get that sustained movement. So I think what's pretty interesting on the jiu-jitsu, and the guys that I've rolled with that were really good jiu-jitsu players, were all like super low heart rate. Like they were super passive and just very relaxed in how they were doing anything. So like they were almost kind of just, hey, I'm just going to lay here and I'm just going to be extremely efficient in my movement, and I'm going to tire you out and let you do something stupid. I mean, I remember like rolling with the dude, and like as I had my hand on his chest, being like, this dude's heart isn't even going fast. So I think that there's definitely, like, you know, we were talking about like building a big aerobic base. I think there's an aerobic component to jiu-jitsu that comes after you've mastered the basics. I think the beginners probably go in there and fucking get all excited, gas themselves out, and want to go too hard. And the dudes that are really just pretty practical, really good, and been doing it a long time, just kind of lay back, super technical with all their movements, choke you out, and get on to the next one. So I think that there is a very real training response for it. I don't know if I would say, hey, you know what, I'm going to do, jiu-jitsu for my strength work. Like there's a conditioning component. We actually have a lot of people on power athlete programs that use our strength programs and then mix it with jiu-jitsu for their conditioning. Mm-hmm. So I think as long as you're still in the weight room, lifting heavy weights and moving them fast and using compensatory acceleration and a lot of other things within the training model, I think the jiu-jitsu looks really good for that low level, base level kind of, we talked about that kind of lower density training response.
Oh yeah, makes a lot of sense. Last question on exercise. Then I would just like to ask you a couple of questions on nutrition, and then play a little game. Do we have time? Cool.
Yeah, sure, for sure.
Cool. Thank you. So the last question was going to be in terms of weightlifting. Do you think that weightlifting is a necessary tool for athletic performance, or too much skill involved? You don't really need to do it.
I do not think that you need to Olympic weightlift to be a great athlete. I think that there is a kind of a misconception in the CrossFit market that like somehow the path to, righteous athleticism goes through Olympic weightlifting. And I disagree. I think great athletes are very good Olympic weightlifters. I think Olympic weightlifting is a shitty way to develop athleticism. Mm-hmm. And if Olympic weightlifting was the gatekeeper for athleticism, then why do just a fraction of the NFL players and the best athletes in the world Olympic lift? I mean, almost the best athletes in the world do not do Olympic weightlifting. So, but some of the most gifted athletes I've ever seen are incredible Olympic weightlifters. So I don't know if Olympic weightlifting is, will take an unathletic person and make them athletic, but somebody who's athletic and moves well that gets into Olympic weightlifting is really good at it. So I think what it does is it shines a light on people. But at the end of the day, like I said, athleticism is the ability to seamlessly and effortlessly combine primal movement patterns through space to accomplish a known or novel task, which is my definition of athleticism, or power athlete's definition of athleticism.
Please repeat it. People must know it by heart.
The ability to seamlessly and effortlessly combine primal movement patterns through space to accomplish a known or novel task. So that's how we've defined athleticism for a long time here at Power Athlete. And Olympic weightlifting, if done well, is extremely, is a great training response, the ability to move the weight dynamically in this. But at the end of the day, if you can take somebody who's a pretty good football player and pretty athletic and teach them to Olympic weightlift, I think it's a valuable skill. But I wouldn't say that it's a requirement for people to be great athletes.
Mm-hmm. I would say I agree. And sometimes I view stuff like snatching as a test. It's like, do I have to be strong to snatch? Yes. Do I have to be flexible? Yes. Do I have to be powerful and explosive? Yes. Does it create all of that? Well, yes, it might do. But if I want to get faster, I'm going to sprint, or I'm going to do some plyos. If I want to get stronger, I'm going to put a barbell on my back. So I have to have all those tools in order to be good in snatching. And then what is left is only skill work of the actual snatch. Sure. That's how I view it, but I really wanted your opinion on it. So I guess we're kind of in connection here. In terms of food, you've been known to have, I don't know if you like the label, but the paleo, you've been known to be very much on the paleo side of dieting. Are you still paleo? Can I say this?
Yeah, I mean, so when I came in the NFL in '99, I worked with a guy named Mauro De Pasquale, and so Dr. De Pasquale wrote the original. He was the original kind of father of carb cycling, and he wrote a book called The Anabolic Diet and the Metabolic Diet, and in it was like a 5-day low carb, ketogenic approach, followed by like a higher carb day, and we would kind of do these refeeds, and it's really good for body composition. And for strength, there isn't a bodybuilder or, person on the planet that's in really good shape that doesn't do some form of calorie cycling. And in there, and I remember his book when he was like, hey, this is what I want you to do for your diet. All of the diet was kind of real food stuff. It was like, steak, and it was kind of paleo-esque in a lot of ways in that there was, one ingredient and, very minimally processed foods. So I had eaten that way, and I remember when I met Rob Wolf in 2009 at the CrossFit Games, he started talking to me about this paleo diet, and as he was talking about it, I was like, oh, this is like Vince Gironda's Stone Age diet. This is how and then I mentioned, I've been, Dr. De Pasquale has done my diet stuff, at which point Rob Wolf was like, you're like the first person I've ever talked to that kind of has eaten this way. And I'm like, yeah, man, like this is how I've eaten for the last, 10 years of my life, and this is how we ate kind of growing up. And so I would say that the majority of my meals are centered around some form of meat. I eat vegetables. I eat a little bit of fruit. If I'm going to eat a carb, it's usually going to be like oatmeal or rice. And other than that, maybe a little bit of corn. If it's like corn tortillas or something, we might eat like Mexican food. I mean, you can't have Mexican food without at least a corn tortilla. But for the most part, I would say I probably eat not a ton of processed foods. Am I a strict paleo person? Like, I always thought the paleo was kind of bullshit when they were like, oh, you can only have more than like 4 eggs a week. Like, so I definitely would eat more eggs than that. I think the other thing too, which is a little bit hard is, and I think people haven't figured this part out yet, you need carbs to carry, or the only macronutrient I've seen that really affects body composition is protein. But it becomes extremely difficult to put on muscle without carbohydrates. So the problem when you get into the paleo diet, it becomes very low carb. And I think it's hard to carry a ton of lean body mass and carry a lot of muscle on a low carb diet. So we're kind of in a catch-22. If you're eating it for longevity and you don't want to put on muscle, I think a ketogenic or even a kind of a low carb paleo diet makes a lot of sense. But something that I've subscribed to for a number of years, and I did a talk for the NSCA on this, is the idea of metabolic flexibility. So metabolic flexibility is defined as your body's ability to use both carbs and fat as fuel sources, and the seamless and effortless kind of transition between the use of like carbohydrate, like in high intensity needs, and then fat for just your autonomic, for your, aerobic needs. And the biggest determining factor when I really dug into this thing, because this was like a 5-year process, I was kind of obsessed with this idea of metabolic flexibility as this indicator for diet, health, and training, and all these other key factors. And when I got into it, all the research basically pointed to the people with the most amount of lean body mass. So the people that carry the most amount of lean body mass, the most muscle, with the lowest ratio to fat, were the most metabolically flexible people. Huh. So there was nothing in there about how they became metabolically flexible. The leanest people were the most metabolically flexible because fat is extremely oxidative, and fat mixes up a lot of stuff. So as you go back and you're like, okay, what did we say earlier? That it's really hard to be able to sprint efficiently, you have to carry a lot of lean body mass. The most metabolically flexible people are the ones that carry the most amount of lean body mass with the lowest amount of fat. So if I want to be the most metabolically flexible, I probably need to lift weights. I probably not eat like an asshole, and I probably need to sprint. Right? Like it's well, like, yeah, I mean, it's true, man. People do. Like I people get in this idea of like, oh, I need a cheat meal. And I'm always like, man, like your whole life's been a cheat meal. It blows me away in so many ways. But at the end of the day, I would say probably 80% would be kind of the foods classified I would call within a paleo kind of scope. I'm not necessarily like a paleo zealot by any means, but like I eat 300 grams of protein a day. I usually eat about 75 grams of fat and then about 100 grams of carbs on most days. And then like maybe like one day a week, I'll ramp the carbs up to like 300, 350, and then I go back down. So I found that I kind of do a little bit of carb cycling, tends to work pretty well for me.
Do you do any type of fasting? Do you start eating at lunch or something like that? How's a typical day?
No. So fasting's pretty interesting. Over about 10 years, I read all this research on fasting and really came down to just a really fancy way to caloric restrict. So if like there's really no magic in fasting. Yeah, that's it. So there's no magic in fasting. There's no like people get into all this fucking mysticism and magic and all this voodoo happens when you fast. No, you're reducing your feed window. So if you don't eat like an asshole, or if you can't control yourself, it makes total sense. Let me get a 4-hour window to stuff my face, right? And it's a fancy way to caloric restrict. But for me, I'm pretty dialed in that I'm not going to go and fall off the wagon and go eat a cheesecake or something. So like what I do is I pretty much like my first meal, like we train at 7, so my first meal's at 6. I get done, I probably eat my next meal at 10, and then I'll eat probably here at 1:30, and then probably maybe 4 o'clock, and then or I'll maybe dinner at 5, and then maybe something before bed. So I try to be pretty consistent with my calories. And if I'm going to fast it, probably maybe on a Sunday, I probably will just drink some coffee, and if I'm and mainly because I know how many calories I want to eat, and I'll just eat them all at dinner.
What meal do you have at 6 a.m. before you work out? What type of meal?
I do a scoop of protein, like whey protein, and then I do 2 scoops of like this collagen protein, and then I do a packet of oatmeal, and I shake it up in a shaker, and I do that. So it gets to be like 45 grams of protein, and then 24 grams of carbohydrate, which is in the oatmeal. And so that's what I do before I train, and then I come back and I usually eat like 10 to 12, maybe 14 ounces of meat. Today I had a cup of rice, and I think I had some cranberry juice and maybe an orange.
What are your
favorite? After this,
what are your favorite carbs?
Rice? Steamed white rice is a good one. There's a pretty cool deal where if you cook the rice with a little bit of coconut oil, and then you take it out and put it in the refrigerator and let it stay in the refrigerator for about 12 hours, it becomes starch-resistant rice. So you can actually eat more, and it actually reduces the calories by half. So like it's a really interesting thing, man. Like if you take rice, you cook with a little coconut oil, and then you put it in the refrigerator for 12 hours.
Really?
It changes the molecular structure of the rice and reduces the amount of carbs in it. So yeah, look it up. It's also good for the gut with starch-resistant rice. Do a little Googling on that. That one's pretty neat. So I do that one.
Nice.
And then probably just I eat a ton of ground meat. So obviously we get like cows and kind of do hunting stuff. So a lot of that meat comes into ground meat, and so I end up just cooking a ton of ground up meat and just kind of mix it up.
What about dairy? Did you take any dairy? Like milk, raw milk?
A little bit of Greek. If I could get it, it's pretty hard to get here in Texas, but I do a little bit of Greek yogurt.
Huh.
I do like Greek yogurt, so I try to hit a little bit of that if I'm low on calories. But I try to have that at least maybe 3 days a week. I'm not overly, like my little boy smashes whole milk. He's 4, he drinks milk all day. But for me, like I drank a lot of milk when I was a kid. Like I'm not obsessed with dairy. Like I don't like I'll eat a little bit of cheese, but for the most part, like I just like it's just extremely nutrient dense. Like you sit down and eat a couple pieces of cheese, and you're like, man, that was a lot of calories. So
yeah, for sure. It's nice to know that you're normal. A lot of people, it's I fast like 2 days in a row and stuff like that. And then I lift heavy weights, and we do a lot of training and stuff, and I like to eat. But I just don't eat like an asshole, man. Like it just, I love that. That's got to be in the next T-shirt. Don't eat like an asshole.
And like we run into people all the time with diets, and it's like they like at the end of the day, what was it? Einstein's, thermodynamics deal, there's no energy is lost, no energy is created. So when you look at this deal, like, there's a very real problem that, man, most people overeat. And like, even if they just overeat their calories 1 or 2 meals or a single day, a lot of times it throws them out of caloric deficit. And, and that's a huge problem, because I think just people have been sold this bag of goods that it's not your fault. The reason you're out of shape is, the insulin paradox, or this, or bad genetics, or here. No, I've seen people with poor genetics get in shape, and I've seen people that, have no business looking the way they do, look the way they do. It comes down to, am I in a caloric restriction? Am I lifting heavy weights? Am I doing enough aerobic work? Am I getting enough sleep? And am I being consistent? And if you can match those three, you usually hit your goals pretty well.
And it's so easy to get all tangled up in that feeling that, oh, but I work out every day. Yes, but maybe you sit down for the rest of the day. So it's not that huge of a caloric expenditure. So you don't eat like an asshole. I love that. John, I'm going to let you go. I would just like to do this little game that we assembled before we finish, because like yourself, I love the 80s movies, I love the 70s movies, I love the fight movies. So I was wondering which would be your favorite training montage in a movie. So here's the little intro that I got ready for you. So please watch the screen.
Okay.
This is so cheesy. So now, how do you like the music?
I loved it.
Wait. I still haven't told you the rules. Wait. There's more. There's more. So I'm going to show you. So this was just the intro. So I'm going to show you five different movies, which I'm sure you know all of them, obviously. And you're going to pick from the fifth, so from the worst or not the best to the first. So it's number 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 being one, obviously the best training montage movie. So it might not just be the scene that we're seeing specifically, but the movie in itself in terms of training sequences. Okay, so I'm gonna show you.
Okay.
And here's the mix. I love this one.
I do too.
You can see the wire.
Oh my God, yeah.
Best part. Of course. We had to, right?
Yeah, no, it's the man.
Your buddy.
That was great. We loved having him on.
Obviously, this is mandatory to keep in this mix as well. Ivan Drago. We're so gonna get fucked by YouTube for this. No monetizing this video whatsoever. And the last one. I love this scene,
I
man.
just watched. We just watched Bloodsport and Kickboxer with my kids.
Really? Oh, that's a good way to go. Yeah.
Yeah. We just watched these.
Cash must have loved it, right? Okay, it's done.
Oh, dude, he was. Yeah, he was. Yeah, dude, he was like that kid.
How old is he?
I am so stoked. These 4. I tell him all the time. I'm so stoked to be his dad. I am so happy to be like his dad and take him on this journey. And I'm so I tell him all the time, I'm like, I'm so, and I tell all my kids this, but I tell him especially, I was like, do you know how excited I am to be your dad? To take you on this journey and to have you grow up. And I want to see the person that you become. I want you to become the man I know you can be. And I'll be there cheering you on the entire way. And
Oh, that was,
but yeah, so
that was so sweet, man. You're giving me goosebumps. Come on.
I'm so lucky. Like my wife is like, I can't speak more highly of my wife in terms of like everything about her, like, and my kids, like, having girls, like I got twin daughters, a lot of work. I would trade 10 boys for every one girl. I would take 10 of my son cash for everyone. If I had 21 of those, it would be less work than what my two daughters are. But like I'm really happy that I waited till after my NFL career to get married and have a family and see all this so I can be more involved. I can't imagine playing in the NFL, which was such a selfish endeavor, and having a wife and kids. Like I just don't think I would have been good at it because it just takes a lot. It's really selfish, and I don't know if that's fair. So I was happy to wait. But we watched those movies. My top, the number one or number 5 would be the No Retreat, No Surrender.
Oh, why?
I mean, it's good, but it's not as good.
Oh, okay.
All right, and then
I guess
what was so we had Rocky 3, Rocky 4, and then Kickboxer. And what was the other one?
The other one was Vision Quest.
Oh, okay. So I would go with, man, this is hard. I would go with Vision Quest at number 4.
I'm going to call Matthew.
And the only reason is because you put in the 2 greatest training montages ever in Rocky 3 and Rocky 4.
Yeah.
So then I'm going to have to go with probably, this is so hard. Rocky 3 is one of my favorites. So that would be 3. 2 would have to be Kickboxer. Because there's so much amazing imagery in that. Do you remember like he's doing like the thing and he looks up and there's like an eagle flying above?
Oh yeah.
And then he thinks like that the like these Thai gods are like there's just like so much. There's so much in that training.
He says, like, when you're here, just listen. Listen to what? Just listen. By the way, speaking of Van Damme, how bad was that kid actor playing Van Damme in Bloodsport? Remember that? Not yet.
Yeah,
not yet.
yeah.
You can forget about our deal.
Don't question me.
If you expect me to be punching bad, you can forget about our deal.
It's like a Russian guy.
He's not from Belgium. Oh yeah, no, it's dude. So that movie was pretty good. But then I would say the number 1 has to be Rocky
4. Yeah,
like the training montage. Rocky's is incredible. Drago's is the best when he's like running around that like badly lit 400-meter track and like punching the heavyweight bag as he runs. Like that, he's on that weird machine that's doing this with the arms and like, power cleaning. And they're like, and then
he was power cleaning. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Rocky's in Siberia running up a hill and like, he's got like the carriage he's push jerking. To this day, the best. So yeah, I'll go Rocky 3 for number 1. We'll go Kickboxer, Rocky 4 or Rocky 3, which is hard because where they were at, like that's the boxing gym you want. Like that was in Venice, downtown LA. Like those are the spots, and they're running on the beach in the weird polyester. So that would be 3. 4 would be Matthew Modine in Vision Quest, and the only reason that's not higher is because the other ones are so damn good.
Yeah, and they don't have a lot of training sequences in Vision Quest. If you think about it, it's not. I mean, you watch him run to the sound of Journey, which is great. Only the Young. Which one's your favorite song in that movie? That's a tough one. Is it Madonna? Is it Journey? Is it Europe?
No,
not Europe. Berlin. Berlin have a song there.
No, what is it?
It's called No More Words.
Hold on. Now I'm gonna have to pull this up because the song. Hold on. Now I'm gonna have to pull this up.
Only the Young from Journey. Which one is it?
No.
People talking and they're saying that you're leaving. John Waite.
John Waite Change. Like that song to me is yep. But then the other one too, which is probably like the hallmark of that whole movie. As soon as you hear it, is Lunatic Fringe by Red Rider.
Oh, how come I missed that one?
That's Lunatic Fringe. Like that's the one where he goes into before the his big match, when he goes into the the other room to do his warm up.
Yeah.
That's the song that plays. Dun 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 dun. Like that one. So
okay. I missed that one.
Yep. So yeah, I go with Lunatic Fringe.
Lunatic Fringe. Okay. John, this was incredible. Thank you so much. I've been wanting to do this with you for the longest time, because I saw you the first time maybe 2009, 2010 with that documentary, which I'm sure it's not. Sometimes you say, "Oh, goddamn, that documentary again." I know. It was tough.
Dude, the amount of people that were home, for the quarantine, like the lockdown, that were watching Netflix and saw that movie and then decided to hit me on Instagram or social media was pretty funny, man. Like the amount of people that were like, I was watching this whole CrossFit movie and I can't believe, and I'm like, you know what? I was young. We didn't get paid anything. And, but it was fun.
It's a classic.
It's a classic.
It's a classic. It's going to be a classic.
I appreciate being weaved into that kind of a early CrossFit culture.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So, John, thank you so much for this. And I don't know if you have any final words or tips on training for most of our audience.
Yeah.
If you had like one final word or one final advice, or plug in your programming and your website / platform.
Yeah, we're easy to find, powerathletehq.com. We have a bunch of training programs. I mean, probably right now, 5,000+ people a day are checking programs around the world. So we have a program for just kind of fits about every need, Field Strong, which is our kind of athletic based performance program, Jack Street, which is more bodybuilding, the Hammer stuff, which has really been for our first responders, door kickers, and actually a lot of hunters are doing that one. Grindstone, which is set up more for people that are professionals that lead a little more flexible schedule. And then I reskinned the original CrossFit football into something that's called Johnny Wad, which is just kind of a tongue-in-cheek humor. But if you followed or know about CrossFit football, it's basically, I just changed the name. Standard old school CrossFit football is called Johnny Wad, and you can find that at johnnywad.com. And then I added another pretty fun program called Johnny Bod, which is just an accessory program that I put out, which is, just looks like calves, abs, and arms, and, chest, and a bunch of fun stuff. So a bunch of people follow that too. So we're pretty easy. We do a methodology where we teach people how to coach and, the information that they need to be successful in the strength and conditioning world. So we do that and, do a podcast, which is Power Athlete Radio, which, has been pretty good. So I think we're coming up on our 400th episode, which we, recently just had Matthew Modine from Vision Quest on, which is pretty good. So a lot of fun stuff.
Thank you so much for this, and go have some lunch, because I'm sure you're probably starving. It's like what, 2 o'clock, 2 p.m. there or something.
Sorry. It's 2:15. Well, dude, thank you so much for having me and inviting me on. It's always great to connect with people, and dude, I just really always blessed for the opportunities to meet new people.
Thank you so much, and say hi to Luke and Tex for me.
I will. Thank you.
See ya. Thanks.
Bye.